Hello, welcome to Revamp Allium. I wanted to talk about UFOs and civilization types, specifically civilization type 1 and the relation that I see between 1 and type 5. I just want to kind of go over this kind of like stuff. I'm learning too. I've been reading a little bit about this stuff in an much older book written by Jacques. I'll have to put it in the resources what book I read from. But so civilization type 1 is impractical concept, really, to classify. Well, eventually, we're going to talk about how we're going to reclassify it one day. Civilizations that can harness natural energy. That's all it really is. But I don't think it includes parameters including the afterlife. Um, they manifest and exploit natural energy. But when you get to civilization type 2, there's a bit more practical in the sense that civilizations could reach other planets, which kind of makes me think they're humanoids, but I can't really figure out a theory that proves they're humanoids other than the stars. Like, there's such things like stars that are together that, like, one's older and one's, like, younger. But stars can be reborn, so I don't see how that's a big deal. Um, but civilizations with humanoids, they can harvest fuel on like beyond their own home planets. That's what type 2 is. The first two are kind of boring, but I do think that civilization 1 is going to be really important in our the topic because there's like such thing as civilization type 5, and that civilization can manipulate the multiverse. And then we have like type 3 and type 4, but I think those are separate castes from like humanoids. I think those are more like aliens and like creatures. Because it's been said that a civilization who can harvest and manifest energy not only in the galaxy, but in the whole of the universe. Like Civilization 3, they harvest and manifest energy in the galaxy, but Type 4, they can do the whole universe, they say. Um, that doesn't really remind me of a human. That reminds me of more like an alien or something. I'm not going to put him in God form because I think that's kind of like reserved for us. And I'll get to that at the very end. But I have a whole theory of how this all combines together. Um, so, um, so basically, if you quantize these civilizations, humans and I think would be able not only to render but create a fundamental base on exactly what kind of beings are able to exist. And I don't think they're human. I think they're more alien than you or I. But very soon, someone's going to be able to generate and map the ecosystems that aliens inhabit these developments and will be considered criteria for understanding alien life, even though we have not yet made contact. If we assume that Civilization 5 is a viable product and the elements that compose the multiverse is controlled by beings, I think it's safe to say that we will find God or gods, whichever term needs more classification, because to manipulate the multiverse, it's no different than what happens in exploration. With Type 2, except you would have to be able to navigate and therefore be able to habitate the multiverse. So in Type 2, you clearly need to be able to habitate and explore, and that's no different than what happens in Type 5, because you have to be able to habitate the multiverse, which does not put much strain on the idea that we could become part of civilization Type 5. When you place the state of human decay within different state beyond the boundaries that define all types of civilizations, the afterlife doesn't even mean that we don't exist somewhere in the universe. And supposedly there could be like a type 5 humanoid god, goddess, whatever you want to call it, that is living in kind of like a hollow moon or like I guess what we'll call a satellite. But there is a scenario on a moon, or what people call a hollow satellite. The moon's called Phobos, which orbits around Mars but has no real trajectory that math can define within our solar system. And regardless of the relative readings from new satellites that have been displayed, the classification for an object that does not orbit the mathematical symmetry should not be called a moon. You can't call something mathematically that doesn't orbit within our solar system a moon. It has to be reclassified. So we cannot prove it is artificial or hollow, but we can assume that it is its constitution defies the natural laws. We're going to jump into the other part, but let me go ahead and read something. I was talking to ChatGPT about what I wanted her to like visualize. I wanted to show how Type 3 and Type 4 civilizations are more alien than human, and how humanoid Type 2 civilizations should be. And I want to show how Type 1 civilizations can become more powerful when they manipulate the multiverse, kind of like gods, but really more vulnerable. I say vulnerable because we don't know what would be in the multiverse that has to do with evolution and um, creation. I mean, they talk about how Type 3 civilizations they can create Type 1 civilizations. And then I got really interested in that. So supposedly there could be like a Type 5 humanoid goddess, whatever you want to call it, that is living in kind of like a hollow moon, or like I guess what we'll call a satellite. But there is a scenario on a moon, or what people call a hollow satellite. The moon's called Phobos, which orbits around Mars but has no real trajectory that math can define within our solar system. And regardless of the relative readings from new satellites that have been displayed, the classification for an object that does not orbit the mathematical symmetry should not be called a moon. You can't call something mathematically that doesn't orbit within our solar system a moon. It has to be reclassified. So we cannot prove it is artificial or hollow, but we can assume that its constitution defies the natural laws. Okay, so we're jumping into the second segment. We're talking about tachyon signals, which is based on this celestial object that was discovered during the Cold War. It's called CTA 102. And it basically impacted deep space physics and the human imagination. 8 billion light years away in some elliptical galaxy of the constellation of Pegasus. If you can imagine a radio loud quasar which realistically emit immense radio and optical radiation, think of it like a cosmic song that even has its own dedicated visualizer, but is no different than a lighthouse, which by normal standards is odd, but only has one explanation. Light, which has been observed, as you know, by humans, is viewable, but the effects we are talking about, radio and visually, are not defined by light. When you talk about that sort of thing in the void or in space, is always predetermined by light years. But the particles of tachyon signals are not particles of light, and the fact that we can interpret them is also no coincidence. The quasar seems to be directly pointed at the Earth, which may be a viable excuse for now, and they're calling that kind of anomaly in space a blazer. I don't know how many blazers are out there. So I have a different theory. Perhaps civilization type 5 is sending the signal to indicate that they are too human, and not too human, but they are also human, and that they have gone to major lengths to reach us from where they are to further demonstrate the civilizations are capable of. Let's talk about the theory on something called thermal barrage. This would happen when a nearby star very close had exploded, which there is already discovered an isotope, iron 60, which can be found on Earth but is supposed to exist within a supernova placed roughly 100 light years away. So 100 light years away, there was this thermal barrage. If that star exploded, yeah, we would get the isotope iron 60, which was found. So we know that happened. And to jump into technical insight, if there's a civilization 3 created this event, it would be proof that radiation killed the dinosaurs in the thermal barrage, which conditions mutated the dinosaurs and set off human evolution itself. So we already have an idea of what civilization looks like when humans are not created, and that is one possibility. As far as some point civilization 3 was coupled with our planet, and because they had to be able to improvise the creation of humanity, and not too distant, wouldn't be too far away from creating heaven, a civilization type 1, which would evolve and be reclassified. It needs to be reclassified. So that would be proof that radiation killed the dinosaurs in the thermal barrage, which conditions mutated and set off human evolution. So we already know and have an idea of what civilization looks like when humans are quote, not created. And that is one possible truth at some point. Civilization 3 must have been coupled with our planet. And because they had to be able to improvise the creation of humanity and destroy, I guess they destroyed themselves in the process. So, in other words, civilization type 1 has to be reclassified because humans evolve and become part of civilization type 5. That's my theory. The void is kind of like this new space that exists between all the civilizations, and we're at the peak of civilization, not the video game either, because that video game disgusts me all of a sudden. So that will be all with On and Be Well.